Hello and welcome to the Square State Sandlot podcast. On this episode, we sat down with Erick Pauley, current sideline reporter for our Wyoming Cowboys football team. You can catch him on the home broadcast on Wyo Vision, located at gowyo.com. He is very gracious with his time, so we broke this into two parts. In the first part, we discuss his journey to his current position, the mystique of college football, both as a media member and former player, changes within the sport, and where he thinks it ends up, and his and Kyle's Pittsburgh Steelers. Enjoy.
Welcome back to another episode of Square State Sandlot. I'm Kyle Gilmore. I'm joined as always with Bill Montoya. But we have a third today that we're very excited about. We've been wanting to bring you on for a while. Just very excited, obviously, being another local boy. We're just pumped to have you on, Erick. If you would, just give us a quick rundown, kind of who you are, what you're doing, I guess what got you to where you are.
All right. First of all, thanks for having me on. I want to start by telling you guys, I think what you're doing is really cool. Like, I can't tell you how many times, even in like the last 5 years, somebody's been like, you should start a podcast, or somebody's been like, we should start a podcast. And the follow through is never there. And you guys come back every week and you're generating new content. And so often when people start their own podcast or they start their own, hyper local blogs or something like that, often what it turns out is like, they're just like regurgitating, like what the national media is already talking about, right? What national sports media is already doing. You guys take your own hot takes on stuff, right? And kind of hit it from the local stance. And I appreciate that about you guys. So I think what you're doing is really cool. For me, I got started in media, my first job, right, where I actually got paid to do it was radio, but previous to that, I tell people this all the time, and some people are like, maybe you shouldn't tell people that because they think I should be embarrassed about it. But I got my start in doing play-by-play by doing video games.
Really?
I was the voice of the World Series of video games for Call of Duty for 2007, and so I traveled around and we did. Like Louisville and Dallas, Fort Worth, and all these things. And finally, somebody was like, "You got a pretty deep voice. Why don't you try to do something with this?" And I was like, "All right, well, let's try to do something with this." And so I started out here in Green River and just went from doing like weekends, taking out the trash, and doing religious programming to doing news, and then doing a morning show. And then the guy that did Bridger Valley Sports here for Lyman and Mountain View, he left. And they're like, do you want to do play-by-play? And I was like, sure, let's try that. And from the moment, the very first game, I was like, this is what I want to do with the rest of my life. Like, there it is. That's it, And so I was here for a while doing that, went to Riverton, became the sports director up there, and then had the opportunity to come back home here and be around my family. We just had our daughter, she's 2 now, but we had another one on the way. And so being able to be around family was a big deal. So we're back in Green River, and recently had the opportunity to become the sideline reporter for the University of Wyoming. And that's been a dream. You know what I mean? Like, that was 7 years ago, 8 years ago, I put on Facebook, like, I want to be a voice, for the Cowboys or something like that someday. And so here we are, and I got my foot in the door. And I tell you, it's more fun than I could have imagined.
Yeah. And what does that entail? Are you on the sidelines for football, basketball?
Yeah.
Sports,
so it's just football.
Okay.
Very few, actually nowhere for radio would do a sideline reporter for basketball. Television, you see the sideline reporter, right? And it's, they don't look like me for television, right? And so for me right now, it's just football sidelines. And, I've said this to a few people that have asked me about the job, or, somebody did an interview a little while ago, and it was, how does it feel to be back at the University of Wyoming? And, I played at the University of Wyoming, but I wasn't a player, right? Like, I was there. Yeah. I wanted to wear the brown and gold. I wanted to be a part of that. And, I made a play or two here or there, right? But, like, I wasn't a guy. And I spent a lot of time on the sideline. And I had that whole thing kind of drawn short due to an illness, and had to quit playing college ball. And that took a lot out of me, as a human, right? You define yourself as an athlete for a while, and then all of a sudden that's taken away. And so to find a way back in to be a part of the Cowboy football program again is the most therapeutic, fun, exciting thing that I've ever been a part of. It's really emotional for me just to be back there.
Yeah, well, that's pretty special. So I think we probably already know, but just for the listeners, how did you get involved and fall in love with sports?
This is interesting, right? Because I can't, like, you guys, I know from listening and watching what you guys do. you guys are true fanatics, right? Of the teams that you follow, of the sports that you follow, and you can rattle off, statistics. You can rattle off, past players and things like that. And that didn't come first nature to me at all, right? Like growing up, and Kyle, we grew up together, man. You know what I mean? Like I moved here when I was, fourth grade, and Harrison Elementary, go Eagles, right?
Go Eagles.
And and moving here in fourth grade, I played soccer. Didn't play football until I got to seventh grade, and didn't really fall in love with the game until I got into high school. And so it was all kind of like I was on the outside looking in for a long time in terms of like being a true fan, right? Because it didn't mean anything to me until I started to play the game for football. And then, I was a basketball guy for the longest time. Like if you take me down 90s memory lane in the NBA, that's my stuff right there, right? Yeah. When the big man was still king and all of that. And then, for football and like sports statistics and things like people all the time, they're like, man, I wish I had you on my team for trivia the other night. No, you don't. I know how to do the preparation part to be a broadcaster, right? Yeah. And I know how to do that kind of research to give you the information that's going to be relevant to you at the point in time that it's relevant in the game. And I'll dig for a week to find that one little tidbit. But in terms of like being a true fanatic of the game, probably as close as I come is like, like the shot put and discus stuff that I told you about. I was really big on that in terms of like, records and distances and all those kinds of things. But
no, I think that's amazing. We're going to dive into that a little bit later because I got some questions.
My love of sports comes from playing them, right? Yeah. And then being a fan of Pittsburgh and stuff like that. I was just growing up in West Virginia, and then being in Wyoming, I'm a Cowboys fan, and it kind of just happened for me like that slowly I found teams or jerseys I liked as a kid. Sometimes that's the way it happens, so.
Well, some of us are less fortunate, and their dad got to see, the glory years of the Raiders and pass that on to me, and then I get to see 34 years of nothing but losing, basically.
Right. That's tough.
Well, you handle it well, Bill.
Yeah. It teaches me to, laugh through the pain, I guess. So, you've already kind of talked about how you fell in love with sports. Is it still a source of pride being a state champion?
Oh, sure. If you're talking about the football, like the football side of things, another broadcaster told me one time with state championships that they just don't hand these things out. Yeah. That it truly has to be something special. And especially for a place, growing up in Green River, like it's a small school for the classification that we played in. And, I'll get a little grief. Yeah, I'll get a little grief from people every once in a while. Like you share a memory from high school football or something like that. And for those people that are like, really, my response to them is you just don't get it.
Yeah,
you don't understand the memories, the bonds that are made when that kind of stuff happens. It'll last a lifetime.
Well, and the people that have that reaction always really get under my skin too, because that state championship actually is a super big sore spot for me because I loved doing sports growing up.
Sure.
And then when I hit high school, doctors wouldn't sign off on my physicals for my knees. And so, I was never a star or anything, but I loved doing it. So my playing days were done. It was awesome seeing you guys win that championship, but it always was a bit of a sore spot.
I had two things that I wanted to comment on, Kyle, here. First of all, my first memory of Kyle Gilmore, was moving to Wyoming, and we're at Harrison Elementary School. We're playing down on that little grass field, right? I don't know if this is 25 years ago or something like that. And
so it's been a minute.
Yeah, we're playing football down there, and you had a Miami Dolphins jersey on it. I don't remember which one it was, but we were playing 500. Like we weren't even really playing a real game, and this dude slings it right, and I'm there thinking like, Kyle kid's got a cannon. Like I remember thinking that, right? And then it also stuck out to me too that I have a vivid memory of you the week before we played for that state championship. We were outside of the high school, and you grabbed me and you said, "You guys are going to do this." You know what I mean? You're like, "You guys are going to do this. Good luck." And
I was pumped, man.
Really cool,
I was so excited. That whole team I basically grew up with.
Sure.
Like you since elementary school or at least middle school. I have a sense of pride in that championship, and I didn't even take place. I didn't even take part in it. So
it's a community thing.
That makes me happy, man. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
For sure.
And that's kind of what we're doing with this whole podcast. That's why it was so exciting to have you on, because, we're just some local boys out of Podunk, Wyoming, pretending like we know what we're talking about.
I'm proud of it, right? Yeah.
You're in good company.
All right, so this one's probably going to be one of the tougher questions, and I guess because of it's related to the football team, it's been a little bit of a rough stretch the last couple of years, especially with the offense. I thought getting rid of Vegan might help, but it seems like it's a bowl philosophy. So do you feel like, being a sideline reporter, do you feel the pressure to always put a positive spin on things, or risk losing access to the players or coaches?
So that's an interesting question. You know what this is a good example of? This is, and if this ever sounds like I'm on a soapbox or something like that, it's not meant that way. But so I've worked in print and I've worked in broadcast, right?
Yeah.
And the Twitter sphere brings something entirely different to the equation. But this is a great example of, and this is my terminology, so I don't know if it fits with anybody else, but it's a great example of active media and reactive media. Okay. And so when I'm on the sideline, when you're doing a live broadcast, for me, if you're doing play-by-play, or if you're doing color commentary, or if you're doing sideline reports, your job is to explain to the listener, to the viewer, what is happening. If you're a play-by-play guy,
Yep.
If you're a color commentator, you're explaining why what just happened, right? And if you're a sideline reporter, you're basically doing a combination of both on the sideline, right? In terms of describing the moods and the feelings, and maybe you catch a little tidbit that you can paraphrase. And so it's active media in the sense that you're talking about what's happening as it's happening. Okay. And granted, I do pregame and postgame interviews as the sideline reporter, but those are done, immediately after the game or before the game. And so with print media, that's what I kind of refer to as reactive media, right? You have time to sit down and think, and you have the time to sit down and form an opinion, and you're supposed to, right? Yeah. You're not there to describe the action. You're there to tell them what happened and why you think it happened, right? And so when I'm on the sidelines, right? Like I consider myself to be a part of, the Cowboys Sports Network, which, is the actual name of what we're doing there, the Cowboys Sports Network. And so my job is to do the best job of asking the questions of the coach that I think best portrays what happened in the game. And so certainly, if you're doing this at a higher level and you're, working for a network, but you're not working for your local broadcast team and you're working at the network level, that changes the equation a little bit, right?
Yeah.
It gives you the right to ask some maybe tougher questions. And so I think it would be a disservice to fans if I were to ask those questions that I thought were leading them somewhere. And for me, it's, Coach, what did you think about the game? Because to me, that's what I'm concerned about, is how did the coach react to the game, or
right.
How did the players react to the game? So I understand what you mean. And it's, I'm the new guy on the broadcast team. I'm the new guy in the locker room. I'm the new guy on the sideline. Sure. But you ask the right questions and you'll get the answers that the listeners want to hear.
Fair enough. Yeah, and I guess
we were very curious about that, just because obviously we want to talk about UW a little bit with you, especially the football program. So we were just, you always wonder how free you are to
sure. And hopefully that doesn't sound like I was dodging that at all, but it's genuinely how I feel about it. Is if you listen to a high school football game or a college football game, and if you're listening to that play-by-play guy I would think that if you could listen for 5 minutes and not be entirely sure who they were calling that game for, that's a good sign.
Yeah.
It's being unbiased.
That's fair.
Yeah, and I think my question more stemmed from, I guess, the beat reporter, and that's not exactly what you're doing. That's more of the, like, Josh Criswell, right? Sure,
and yeah, and those are people that make their living off of asking those tough questions to get the tough answers. And if I've been in that position before and asked those questions, and it's in news you call that hard news, right? That would be hard sports reporting. Yeah. And there's a lot of guys out there that do a lot of great work like that. Cody Tucker over at 7220 Sports. If you guys ever reached out to him, I'm sure he'd be glad to hop on the pod with you. But he's a great interview. And it's something that I think different mediums are meant for, in terms of how you react to the coaches, react to the players.
Cool. Any questions you had specifically about the Cowboys before we get to more of these broad-reaching ones, Kyle?
I don't think so. That basically covered it. I was kind of curious exactly. I don't know. I guess that's what I was wondering was your approach to the players, but it makes sense, based on the level you're at, and then kind of, like you said, you can have the reactive side when you're sitting down putting pen to paper.
Right. And
it makes a lot of sense.
One thing I will add to that is something that is totally lost on. So one thing about fans, right? Fans don't have to be rational. Like, that's the nice thing about fans. They don't have to be rational. As a coach, you got to be rational. As a player, you have to be rational. And as a member of the media, I think you should be rational, right? And so one thing that when I was talking to the other, some of the athletic staff there and to some of the guys that I work with, and I said, one thing that I feel like was lost on the media when I was a player, because I got a lot of media attention as a player, even though I wasn't a big deal, just because I was a Wyoming kid, right? That got to play at the University of Wyoming. And I think I was the first one there in like 3 or 4 years with the coaching change. And I had a lot of media attention, and I can tell you for sure that it's lost on the media that I was 18. You know what I mean? Yeah. And people forget about the fact that these are 18, 19, 20, 21-year-old kids, man. And so those tough questions are those are meant for the NFL, maybe the SEC.
Yeah, probably
kids
there
that
as
are getting
well.
paid. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. No, so this is maybe more of a fun one, and you've only been doing this for is this your first season or is this your second season?
Oh, I'm 2 games deep, man. Okay. This will be week 3.
He's just going.
Yeah.
Well, I guess you can use your previous Mountain West Conference experience while you were on the team, but what was your favorite road stadium to go to?
Oh, man. So I guess I kind of break it down into 2 categories, right? You have the actual feel of the stadium and what the stadium looks like, and then you've got the atmosphere.
Yeah.
And so the very first game that for me I played as a true freshman, and that was Urban Meyer's first year at the University of Florida. And let me tell you that I've never experienced anything like that before or since. From the moment you got off the plane, everybody hates you, right?
Oh, I'm sure.
And we were down 20 before we walked in the building, right?
Yeah.
But and so you're driving on this bus. They take you the long way through campus, not because that's where the bus driver knows to go, but because the police are directing you through campus, right? And so they drive you around, and there's people just everywhere just giving you the clap, right?
Yeah.
And, the finger and all this kind of stuff. And then you get into the stadium, and there are 97,000 people. Like, think about that. 97,000 people in one space, and they are on top of you. And when I tell you that you could not hear the person next to you talking, I mean, you could not hear the person next to you talking. And so that was the coolest atmosphere I've ever been in, just because it was like, welcome to college football, week 1, right?
Yeah.
We're in the swamp, And then in terms of atmosphere, the actual look of the stadium and things like that, Ole Miss was really cool. There's something about those SEC schools down south, guys. Like, they got hedgerows around the field, and everything just feels old. And like the tailgate, you walk through the tailgate to get to the field there. They do that on purpose too. But like, everyone's in sundresses with belts on, and they got collared shirts, and like they're tailgating like they're going to church. You know what I mean? But it's like it is
church there.
It's totally different, So those, and like in the Mountain West, at that point in time, the University of Utah had a brand new stadium, and they're not in the Mountain West anymore. But University of Utah, TCU was like that too. They had a beautiful stadium. They're not in the Mountain West anymore. But BYU, same thing, like this beautiful backdrop there. So I'd probably have to say, though, that the University of Utah stadium was it.
That one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's still a nice area, Bill. All right.
Oh, fair enough.
Well, while we're talking about college football, this is something Bill and I have talked about a lot, as far as the expanded playoff for college football. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Obviously the biggest positive is that the teams can get redundant season to season,
right?
And this is obviously increasing the chances of upsets and things like that. But basically an overview. Where do you see college football heading in the future? 5 years, 10 years, whatever.
So I guess I have 2 thoughts on this, or maybe like 2 different perspectives on this. That I can tell you that as a former player, we are in the minority most of the time when it comes to people being excited about players getting paid.
Yep.
That's normally in the minority. And for the most part, you hear a lot of, these kids are getting a full ride. What are they complaining about? Those kinds of things. And if you guys want to dive into more into that, I'd be happy to, because I got lots of opinions there. But in terms of, things getting redundant in with the same teams coming back in the playoffs and things like that, my response to that, because a lot of this is a hot topic for people to talk about, and my response to that is like, we've been here for 10 years. We've been here since the BCS days, right? We expand the playoffs, but on any given year, in the BCS, you had maybe 6 teams that might have vied for competition there realistically, and there was a lot of familiar names there. And the decision-making process there wasn't one that was a true playoff system and brackets and things like that, right? And it was just kind of, you're going here, you're going there. This is the national championship, right? But on any given year, I'll ask you guys this. How many teams how far could they go past 12 teams and really have competition? Because my answer is, I think, like, on any given year, maybe 15. And so I think you're always going to have those schools that have become football factories for the NFL, that have incredible facilities. And now with the NIL, that has changed the playing field enormously. And so it has exacerbated that problem of having the same teams back every year. And money's going to have that effect. And same thing with the transfer portal, right? And so I'm on the side of the transfer portal. I'm on the side of the NIL. But it is not perfect, and it needs adjusting because it's not sustainable, I think, in the form that it's in. But as a former player, when I saw that happen, I was like, good for you guys.
Yeah.
Good. That's the way I felt about it. So as far as expanding the playoff, I think it was a great idea. It's going to make a lot more TV money. And money is everything when it comes to college sports now. It is everything. And so that move was about money, not necessarily about having more competition, because even if there's a Cinderella team, right, that comes in as that 12 seed and makes it all the way to the national championship, even if they don't win, even if they win, it's the storyline that sells the TV, sells the tickets, all that. So it makes more money, which puts the sport back into the spotlight, and hopefully that leads to good things for the players and the other universities and the conferences, and that money trickles down, right? Because football at the college level right now is top-down economics, and it has to stay that way, or else, with television rights, it doesn't work any other way.
Yep. And does that have you worried for the Group 5 teams versus the Power 5 teams? Do you think the level is going to get even further separated?
Yeah, but I think that separation is coming I don't know that separation has anything to do with the college football playoff, though. I think that, I guess it does, because money, right? But
and that's what concerns me, is if money is ruling this all,
right,
your smaller schools aren't generating money, so they're going to be relegated, has been the term, the buzzword in the media right now.
Right.
So if they're not getting their fair shake to actually get into these games, then they're going to fall off real quick. So
I guess I have to ask what the fair shake is, right? And what I mean by that is, like, if you can't put the butts in the seats, if you can't create the atmosphere to get those players there, then you don't have the money to get those players there. And so if you have the ability for schools to leave conferences, like if this is something that is not relegated, or is not regulated, by the NCAA, saying you're going to play here, you're going to play here, you're going to play here, when it comes down to the university saying, I'm going to go over here, and then you give the players the opportunity to say, I'm going over there, I think everything falls into place, right? Where you, like I said, you've already had these top 15, top 20 teams for the last eternity, right?
Yeah.
And you've had a few people break in there, and they come in, they come out, they come in, they come out. And so I think what you'll have is, teams that are going to be competitive for a national title. You might see the level of play at some smaller schools start to shrink. But I don't know that it's palpable. I don't know that you notice it when you're playing in the Mountain West Conference 10 years from now. Or are you going to be like, man, it was a lot faster 10 years ago? I don't know if it happens.
Well, and to your point, I guess it's hard being Wyoming fans, because if anything, we have flashes of success and we get spoiled for a season or two. And really, we're more used to the lulls, on the grand national scale. So, I'm glad you brought up the transfer portal too, because even Bill and I, initially, we had a very negative opinion on the transfer portal, because on paper, it seemed like all we were going to do is lose our top guys.
Right.
And one of the things was like, I can't remember his name now. Keelan Cox, coming from Alabama. We had him transfer over, and it worked the other way around. And I never really thought we would get movement, laterally, us actually get players on. But it's kind of changed my opinion on the transfer portal. I would definitely like to see some more concrete, I guess, regulation on it, but
Right.
I don't know. I guess my opinion is softened on it a lot, to the extent, I mean, the NFL, Bill and I are very, very much on the side of the players. I mean, it's also their job. They're trying to make money, things like that.
Sure.
So I would say my opinion softened a lot on the transfer portal. I mean, I guess you've kind of already shared that you're a fan of it. Were you always a fan? Was that your initial reaction, or was it kind of a process as well?
My initial reaction to it, was that it took as long for. My initial reaction was that it took as long as it did for players to start to basically threaten to unionize, right, in college football. And what I mean by that is, like, again, being a college athlete is pretty cool, right? Like, you have an opportunity to play college football. That's awesome. But what people have to remember is that for 99.9%, and again, I'm pulling a statistic out of the air there like everybody else does, but most people don't go on to play at the next level, right? They're coming to college. A lot of them don't finish. But the only reason that they are there, they are able to go to school, they are able to gain an education, is because they were athletically gifted. Yeah. And I think that's lost on a lot of people, because all of the hyper focus that we see in the national media is on the big schools, right? Where you've got the kids that are there for 2 years. They come in as full-grown men, as 18-year-olds. They're Heisman candidates as 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds, and then they're going to the league and they're paid, right? And so for everybody else, that's not the case, right? And so there's been some major, and so going back to, like, before the transfer portal changes came, one of the biggest changes that happened for college athletes that I was such a huge proponent of is when players started speaking out about not having money to eat. Okay. Yep. And so, like, when you were in a bigger conference, you're in a bigger school, I'm guessing that probably wasn't a problem, because there's more money, there's more stipend money. So when you're on scholarship, you're given a stipend, and that stipend is to last you 3 months, right? And you're an 18, 19, 20-year-old kid, and you're giving a lump sum of money, and you're told, manage this for 3 months, right? You're paying rent out of that, you're paying your bills out of that, you're paying your food out of that. And it was not sustainable, because it was not enough money. It wasn't, like, it just wasn't. And so as a freshman at the University of Wyoming, you're required to have a full meal plan. They give it to you, so you have the card, you can eat whenever you want to. And it was, I mean, every single day I had an upperclassman coming to me and saying, hey, let me get your card so I can go eat, right? Because they couldn't afford to eat, you know what I mean? And so that change was a huge change, that it was unlimited meals for these athletes that are burning 5,000 to 7,000 calories a day. Like, you're eating a truckload every month, and so that was this huge change. And then the ability for athletes to advocate for themselves, to get themselves into or out of situations that they wanted to be in or they didn't want to be in, and not pay a penalty for it, only seemed fair to me. Yeah. Because, you're winning and losing games based off of your athletic talent. And while I do agree that there should be some limitations on moving within conference teams, because within conference teams, you have a huge amount of familiarity with your play calling systems, with your defense, with your offense, that you could basically hand over a playbook in your head, right? Even if it's not in paper form. And so that's where I stand on that in terms of transfer rules. It's like, if you're outside the conference, I think you should be allowed to go wherever you want to. If you want to go inside the conference, I think you should be allowed to go. But maybe there are stipulations there on, when you play and that kind of thing. But for the most part, we've seen some kids that have transferred schools, flourished, and then found, a place in the NFL, or they found a place on a different team where they probably would not have had that opportunity where they were at. And so I'm about equal opportunity for student athletes, and I think that created it. And while it's a drag for the fans to, get a great player and lose them, put yourself in that person's shoes, right?
Yeah. And I love that you say that, because I think that's the biggest element that, I mean, you already mentioned it, fans don't have to be rational.
Right.
But way too often we look at, and more so on the NFL level, but still even at colleges, I mean, these people aren't real to a lot of fans. It's
sure.
They're the name on the back of the jersey. They're not a face. So, I mean, they're a college kid, like you said. It's you got to have that perspective. And I don't know. I like I said, I've softened a lot on it. I'm a lot more optimistic on where it can lead and it being a positive thing for the NCAA. But I guess we'll see where we're at.
Keeping it relevant to the Cowboys, I mean, you have your Isaiah Naors that, he's an absolute monster at wide receiver, and he's not going to be used in Wyoming's offense. Let's just get that out there. So, like, him improving his situation, like obviously it sucks to lose a player of his caliber, but tough to blame the kid.
I think if you talk to the majority of Wyoming fans, that's exactly how they feel.
Yeah.
And I know for sure that in the locker room, it's probably that way too, right? It's like, go get yours, and by that he's gone someplace where maybe he can shine, right? And that's it's opportunity.
Yeah, and you kind of alluded to it a little bit earlier in saying that you like the NIL, and maybe we could do something different with this scholarship thing. I've always been a proponent of, I mean, these kids are coming, they're doing a full-time job, and then they're also supposed to be getting an education at the same time, which is another full-time job. Not allowed to work externally, so you can't go out there and get another job to supplement your income. So that's where I like the NIL a lot. I feel like this can pay the kids, and they're not worried about the money. But do you think a possible solution would be the guys get a scholarship, doesn't matter when it is, if they come onto the campus and they're just doing sports, do you think that's a possible solution? And then after they're done playing, then they can essentially utilize that scholarship after the fact? Do you think that's potentially a solution to that, where maybe, and I'm not saying communications is not a good path or something like that, but a lot of these guys are not able to take advanced chemistry or something like that because they don't have the time to do it.
Well, and I mean, I could speak on personal experience there. So my dad, engineer, my brother, chemical engineer, my sister, chemical engineer, rocket scientist, and then I came in, I was like, yeah, whatever, I'll be an engineer. Nope. I spent 1 month in engineering courses trying to do that and play football, and it was like, nah, that's not going to happen. Like I couldn't do it.
Tough.
Wasn't. There are some, a guy that I played with. His name was Sean Claffey, and that guy was a 4.0 honor roll student, and was in chemical engineering. I was just like, how are you doing? And he was a fantastic football player, and so like some people are built for it, some aren't, but. So I guess here's my take on that, right? I know so many people like maybe for you guys, right? Like when you came out of high school and it was, what do you want to be? I don't know.
Yeah.
Right. And kids that went to college and you start and you take your basic credits, your prerequisites, and then you get to year 3 and maybe you pull the trigger on, well, I'm going to go this direction or that direction, right? And I do think there's a lot of that happens. There's a lot of that happens with athletes because they take the easy route the first 2 years because it's hard, man. Like it's a full day. And then they do make those turns. They do make those career decisions. And this, I'm kind of sidetracked here, but also like if you finish your collegiate, career in football and you graduate with a communications degree that you don't use, there are people that graduate with degrees in history or people that graduate in degrees in social work and those things that they do not use, but you're earning power. You know what I mean? Like the data is there. Like you graduate with that bachelor's degree, you may not use it, but your earning power has significantly increased. And your earning power because of that bachelor's degree maybe makes a generational change for your family. Like I cannot tell you the number of guys that I played with that were first generation college graduates or first generation college attendees, And so in terms of like finding their path and things like that, some people find that path after they find a degree that maybe they don't use. And I realize that sounds like throwing it away. But as far as, maybe playing football and doing that full time and then coming back to go to school, I know 99% of the guys on the team would be like, yep, let's do that.
Yeah.
But I think you would find way too many that would get done with their football career and then say, I'm going to take a year off. I'm going to fall back on this. I'm going to fall back on that. And so I think you would basically end up with an even more semi-pro football league that way, where probably a lot of those scholarships aren't taken advantage of. And so I do think having the kids being held accountable for maintaining grades is important, because then they are a student athlete and not an athlete, right? And so that's what separates being a college athlete from being a professional athlete. And that barrier gets thinner and thinner every year.
For sure. No, that makes sense. But I feel like, especially the football program, it's already that they're generating all the revenue for all the other sports essentially. So I don't know. I feel like it's going to happen
for most
eventually,
schools.
but
Right. Well, and I mean, there's a lot of schools that have sports programs that don't make any money at all, right? That are being funded by boosters or even the taxpayer at some point in time, right? I mean, not here in Wyoming, but my answer to that, and this happens everywhere, right? Where you see schools spending money on athletic facilities, you see schools spending money on uniforms or helmets, and this high school all the way up, right? I'm not very often a keyboard warrior anymore, gentlemen, but back in my day, right? Like I'd strap on the helmet and go at it. When they put in the new Megatron scoreboards and things like that at the University of Wyoming, there was a lot of people that were, why are we spending money on this instead of spending money on things that actually matter in the classroom? Whether that was raising salaries to attract better talent in terms of professors, or if that was to build new facilities or like upgrade dorms or things like that. I get it, right? I get it. But there are things that you can learn in high school and middle school. There are things that you will learn on a football field that you cannot learn in a classroom. And that means slightly less at the collegiate level because you have way less people that are actually playing the collegiate sport, right? But the atmosphere the collegiate sports create is college. That is college to me. And for so many people, the ability to go to a game, to go to the stadium, to have those memories of the team winning, the team losing, and becoming a fan for life of your university. If you don't have sports, who's putting on that Notre Dame pin? If you don't have sports, who's wearing the cowboy hat that you got on, right? Like it adds an atmosphere to the collegiate experience, whether you're an athlete or a student there or a student athlete. And so
that's a very good point. That is a beautiful point, actually. I mean, especially for a UW, I mean, to anyone that's attended a game there, I mean, that student section is rocking. It doesn't matter. I mean, it doesn't matter how much we're winning by or losing by. That student section shows up every Saturday.
Those beer sticks just keep getting longer and longer too.
I'm trying to find a way to work my sideline reports. I wasn't quite sure on the first home game, but
just tell them you got to fit into the atmosphere, so keep feeding them. All right.
I do have a question for you. We'll stick with college football a little bit. I'll try not to rub it in your face too much, but I got to talk about the backyard brawl.
Yeah.
But the main thing I want to talk about besides the game, and we kind of alluded to a little bit of regulation out there. I'm personally kind of tired of the conference hopping that just continually happens. But really the biggest thing for me is, I mean, it was an 11-year wait for the backyard brawl. Mm-hmm. Like, that is absurd. I mean, Pitt doesn't always play Penn State. I mean, they even have a rivalry with Notre Dame. I'm not saying it should all be, well, the West Virginia one should be every year. But I miss some of that, and the conference hopping has done away with some of these rivalry games. And you talk about atmosphere and putting butts in the seats. That backyard brawl set a record for that stadium. I mean, that's crazy. You know what I mean? And that's also a professional football team stadium.
Right.
So I just wanted to get your take on rivalry games, and even UW has a horse in this race. Obviously, we have the boot, which we have the luxury of still competing for every year. But I just want to get your take on, I guess, rivalry games and what we can do to kind of restore that.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm a little bit of a broken record on this, and not on the sidelines, right? But in high school sports, doing play-by-play, right? Every single time there's a rivalry game that I get to broadcast, I say the same thing. Of whether it's from Green River High School, welcome folks as the Rock Springs Tigers enter the Green River Wolves Den, and that kind of thing, because I say it every time that rivalries are the greatest thing in sports. It does not matter if it is a rivalry between two peewee teams that have been battling back and forth for 3 years. It doesn't matter if it's Lincoln versus Monroe when we were growing up, Kyle. It doesn't matter if it was Rock Springs against Green River. It doesn't matter if it's Wyoming CSU or Pittsburgh, Baltimore, or the Olympic level. Right? There is no finer thing in sports than rivalries, because it brings a different level of emotion and history into it, and it's generational. It is generational.
For sure.
When you step out onto a field, like we don't get to see Green River and Rock Springs play football anymore, and it's a tragedy. The Trono Bowl's gone, right? But when you stepped out on that field for that Toronto Bowl, like you were there with a bunch of people in the crowd that played in that game, and then their dad played in that game, and their dad's dad played in that game, and they remember everything about it. And
they're still hot about it,
right? Yeah, and they're ready to talk trash, And so when you lose those things, you lose the heart and soul of an atmosphere that can only be recreated by that rivalry game happening again, right? You remember where you were, you remember the score, you remember the feeling of winning, you remember the feeling of losing. And so it's a huge problem. And, at the high school level, it comes down to ADM numbers, how many kids are in your school, right? Is what it comes down to there. So, that's different. But at the collegiate level, for me growing up here in Green River, I thought Wyoming's rival for most of my life was BYU. Right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Because that was, all the kids were BYU fans, and so I seriously, I went to the University of Wyoming and I was like, what is this CSU business?
Yeah.
What are you guys talking about? And then to become a part of that rivalry with the boot was like, no, man, that was the most important game of the year every year was that boot.
Everybody circles that sucker.
Yeah. Right. And so it's a huge problem because it does come down to money. And if corporations that are, in charge of television rights or corporations that are selling sponsorship for bowl games and things like that. That's what it all comes down to. And I get it, right? Because the more money that's there, then the more money there is for that school that's involved with it. And so it's a problem that I don't really have an answer for other than maybe inside of conferences saying that, because they schedule football games out 25 years sometimes, right? And you can cancel them and pay penalties and that sort of thing. But I think that comes down to basically both of the schools that are involved in the rivalry have to want to make it work, because you can play outside of your conference. You get, X amount of non-conference games every single year. And so it has to make sense for the schools, and they have to believe that it's worth, the time and the money to keep it happening. And we're lucky in Wyoming because I don't ever see CSU in Wyoming going away. I don't think that goes anywhere.
We're pretty secure there.
Yeah, but it is a huge problem. And like you said, waiting for the backyard brawl. I mean, man, like the suspense of that did not go my way. But what a game. What a game.
I will say that regardless of outcome, that was probably the most fun I've had watching a football game in at least seasons.
Sure.
The way it started out, I was terrified. I thought we were going to get steamrolled, and then obviously it shifted over the remaining of the game. But
it had everything.
It was horrible but wonderful at the same time. The one thing that I maybe thought, and I know it, I can see the downside of it. So take like a Pitt and a West Virginia. I think that would be an absolutely amazing week 0 game. Teams have them all the time. Wyoming was just in one a couple weeks ago.
We'll talk about it. Didn't go very well.
Yeah, not super pumped to talk about it, but I understand also the downside of it. These guys are not always wanting to start on that note. If you have a rivalry game and you're one of these top teams and say you lose, well, you may have just shot your entire, rankings, blah, blah, blah. I get all that, but I don't know what the answer is. I just know that, I couldn't help but sit there watching that game, wishing that I could have seen a backyard brawl with Kenny Pickett. You have all these players that have come through on both sides. West Virginia too. You never got to see this, and it's 11 years is ridiculous. I don't know what the answer is. Somebody needs to figure it out.
Yeah, you'd almost have to, and again, I don't know that it's feasible too, right? Because you are playing for championships is what it comes down to. Rivalries are important, but you're playing for championships. And so whether that's a conference championship or, divisions, or whatever sport you're in, you're playing for that title, right? That's the end goal. And so those preseason games or those 0-week games or the non-conference schedule matter, but they don't until you get to the second half of the season and you're playing for your conference record, right? And so I don't know, maybe you could do something like scoot non-conference games to the end of the season or something like that, but then you're worried about injuries and things like that heading into conference championships. And I feel about it the same way I do about the transfer portal and the NIL, that it's imperfect and it's a problem, but I have no idea how to fix it.
Yeah.
Right.
I know the answer is not waiting 11 years to play a rivalry game, though.
Right.
I was looking at the history of that, and it was, I think they had 4 years off since 1801 or something. Not that far.
Well,
not that far back. 1895.
My thing is you look at some of the importance of those games.
Yeah.
When Dave Onstad led Pitt, and trashed their record. I mean, that was so big. That was huge. On top of a rivalry game. You know, I mean, I'm not saying it's the same thing, but Pitt was ranked 17. You guys were unranked.
Right.
If you had come in and won that game, I mean, that's so big. I don't know. The history is why I love college football.
Right.
You got anything else for college football, Bill?
Yeah, but we'll move on.
We might have to have you back on, Eric.
All right, I'm long-winded. Sorry, fellas.
Me and Bill ramble enough, just the two of us, so it's fun having a third. I wanted to talk to you. You mentioned that you're also a fan of Duke. I went ahead and assumed I'm that guy. I assumed it was basketball.
Correct.
Just because obviously it's Duke, but
right.
You mentioned being into basketball and soccer early on, but what brought you into Duke? Was it just those, them 90s teams? Or?
Yeah, it was Grant Hill, right? Like that was that was it for me. Was Grant Hill, and then storied programs are easy to be fans of because there's so much history, there's so much video, and there's so much storyline for you to take hold of and run with, right? And so. In the days before every conference had their own television network, in the days before you could stream every game, this isn't like a back in my day thing, right? Because we grew up with cable, or satellite television. Right. But, the people that grew up with network broadcasts of CBS, ABC, and NBC, they grew up with those. Like, you were watching whatever game was on, and it was going to be Notre Dame, right? Like you didn't have a choice. And so, growing up with cable TV is like I saw a lot of Duke games, and
they were always on.
Right. Grant Hill was
darlings.
Yeah. Grant Hill was the guy that was like, I thought he was, I thought he was this perfect mix of, a small forward that could, handle the ball. He could bring it down the court. He had an outside game. He was strong in the post. It reminded me a lot of like, I don't know, kind of like Scottie Pippen and guys like that. I just had a lot of fun watching him play. And then he got injured, and in the NBA. But like the storylines that develop in March Madness are what made me a fan of Duke. And so March Madness is its own thing. You cannot give a single piece. Like your whole life, you could not care about college basketball, and you catch Cinderella in March Madness, and all of a sudden you're a fan, right?
Yep.
And so with Duke, it was the storyline of Coach K, and then all those teams on Tobacco Road. Like that's just such a wild. You think of the players that went through North Carolina, the rivalry games that take place between Duke and North Carolina. And you want to be a part of that because you want to experience the rivalry and experience the wins and not the losses. But, it was just like at a young age being a basketball fan. Yeah. It was easy to be a fan.
I got to insert one thing because I love that you love Grant Hill. I'm not saying as far as one of the greatest, but he's in like my top 10 all time.
Yeah.
But with that being said, I don't know if you caught, we talked about this, I don't know how many episodes ago, but did you see the Pistons are bringing back those
unis? The jerseys.
They are beautiful. I'm so excited.
Yeah, the teal ones, right? They're bringing those back.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And when I see that jersey, Grant Hill that's who that jersey is for me.
Yeah.
Oh, I love it. I had to bring that up, but...
Well, don't get mad at me, but I was always cheering for the other team in that rivalry. I wouldn't say I'm a North Carolina fan, but I caught into the mystique, and I guess I've always been a fan of the underdog. And I mean, sure when they had, they both had pretty good stretches there, but Duke was always the favored one, I feel like, in most of those matchups. So,
well, Duke is, they were the Alabama of college basketball.
For sure.
If they weren't the favorite, you were watching the wrong program. Mm-hmm. Coach K just put together some crazy stuff.
Right.
That's all I got for basketball. For me, it's basically been reduced to a March Madness type sport. So you got 1 month of the season where everyone pays attention. Sure, I'm excited to see what Wyoming does with their all the transfers they have coming in this season. But even then, it's not like they're on every day they play, so it's still tough to watch. So
I'm going to tell you guys, watch Cowboy basketball this year.
Yes, I'm excited.
It's a thing. It's a thing.
is there a way, and maybe you can plug this too, because I never get to see you on the Cowboys broadcast. It's always, Big Ten Network or whatever. So is
Right.
there a way to watch these games where you get the local programming?
Some of the games, there's been a big push towards video streaming through the Mountain West Conference with, I believe it's called the Stadium, is what it's called. And so each school basically has its own streaming operation, right? And I've been able to do a couple of broadcasts as a play-by-play guy for the streaming platforms at the University of Wyoming. I did the most recent one I did was the Cowgirls opener against the University of Denver basketball, where they got their Mountain West trophy, and that was pretty cool to get them get their trophies and their rings, and it was pretty sweet.
That's awesome.
But if you go to gowyo.com, there's something called Wyo Vision on there. And that's, if there is a video stream, you'll find it there. It's not all the time, but if there's television rights, that changes things.
Cool.
I think we're actually televised this week, aren't we?
I don't know.
For football?
Yep.
Dang, we're killing it. Twice in one season already.
Lots of television stations these days.
All right, I think we are finally moving on from college. It's a hot topic. This one I'm excited to talk to you about. You alluded to it with your initial memory. I grew up obviously a Dolphins fan. Handful of years back, my wife, her whole family's diehard fans. I was converted after my wife took me to a Penguins game, my first one actually there. I've been to a ton in Denver, but so I am on the same side. So I got to get some of your opinions, because I'm the only one rambling about them most of the time on here. So,
All right, shoot.
To start with, I mean, the elephant in the room is the Trubisky Pickett, if you want to call it a competition. I think we all knew Trubisky was going to start, but I just want to hear your opinions on both of them and what you think we're going to get out of both of them.
So as a Steelers fan, I don't know. I go back to being rational, unrational, right? As a fan, as a Steelers fan, I have to remind myself how lucky I've been as a Steelers fan, right? That basically in my adult life we haven't had a losing season. You know what I mean? Like that's wild, right? And then to be lucky enough to have the stability at head coach, I think has been a big deal.
Big time.
And, I mean, what the Steelers have had like 3 head coaches in the last I don't even know what it is, like 50 years or something. Like it's
well, and it's 3 big names too. I mean, you don't have to be a fan of the Steelers to know those 3 coaches
with Super Bowls attached to them,
Yeah.
And so like I'm lucky enough to have Super Bowls one in my lifetime. Some people don't have that, right? But having a change like that at quarterback, because I mean it's Big Ben he's a first ballot Hall of Famer, right? Like that doesn't roll out of the draft every day or every year. And then, the curse of, if you can, again, we're lucky to be Steelers fans, but like the curse of being a Steelers fan is you're never getting a good draft pick, right? Like you're going to be middle of the pack, bottom of the pack. You're a playoff team every year. With the trading and dealings that went on in the offseason with the NFL, the Steelers were kind of like overshadowed by the media with, what's going on in Cleveland and, Tom Brady and all that kind of stuff. Right. But I like the fact that they're going to put the veteran at quarterback, and I don't mean Mason Rudolph, right? Like Mason Rudolph knows who Mason Rudolph is, right? And so do we. And so Trubisky is, maybe he is the guy, Kyle. I don't know. Like maybe he is the guy, but I think, if you put in the young gun and ask him to sling it out there, and then he gets picked apart by NFL defenses, right? Like that's something that could totally happen. It happened to look at Josh Allen and who he is right now. His first couple of seasons were kind of rough, like he was exciting,
for sure,
but like. He was throwing picks, man, left and right. And so for him to make those adjustments took a couple of years, and it worked out obviously fantastic for him. He's leading MVP voting. And I'm not saying that, this is the next Josh Allen or anything, but you put the seasoned guy in there that's seen the NFL, he's seen the speed, he's seen some of these players. He's led a team before, at the NFL level. And if, Pickett comes up and he's a guy that can take those reins, then he earns it during the season, right? And that might be at the expense of Trubisky in terms of like if he's going to get roughed up, get injured, or he's throwing, a bunch of picks or something like that. I don't know. But I like the idea of protecting your first round draft pick, or protecting your guy that you bring in, And so for the Steelers to spin picks early on offense like that, I always hold my breath. But they develop so well at the skills positions, right? Like they develop receivers so well in camp and bring them up through the system, and they end up on other teams scoring touchdowns sometimes, right? But I like the move. I think protecting the young gun is important in his first. And maybe you saw this happen in Miami, right? With Tua. He came over in 6-7 games or something like that. They benched the Fitz Magic, right? So there's a roadmap for it, I think.
Or their wide receivers end up on the Raiders and not actually playing. You guys get draft picks and then they get cut.
Man, there has been some all-time Raiders things that have happened in the last 12 months. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know how many times I've said that is the most Raiders thing ever that just happened. And then like 2 weeks later, I'm like, that's the most Raiders thing that's just, Yeah.
Like
that's why I say I'm lucky to be a Steelers fan.
Yes. You've had a Super Bowl since you've been alive. I have not. So it's,
right.
I mean, we've been to one, but looks like Kyle just dropped off. There we go.
Oh, my sound cut out. I'm actually, unless I missed anything there in the end, I'm actually really pumped to hear that because, I mean, you made a mention about, the Twitterverse being another monster. Me and Bill have talked about it a lot on here, and just like you said, that, Steelers fans are one of the most spoiled, and really just Pittsburgh fans in general outside of the Pirates, but it's such a spoiled fan base that I love hearing that because I'm of the same opinion. People forget Trubisky. I mean, he was a Pro Bowl selection in 2018.
Right.
He survived that Chicago Bears team. He had nobody.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I'm at least of the opinion, let's give the guy a shot and see what he does. As far as Pickett for me, obviously I loved watching him with Pitt, but the most common comparison I hear for him is Joe Burrow. And if that is even half true, I mean, I'll take it.
Right. Yeah, that's not a bad comparison.
But I love your point about the rookie because, again, we're playing them week 1.
Mm-hmm.
That's a horrible, horrible, horrible starting game for a suspect O-line with a rookie quarterback. So
just go after Apple every time.
Oh, jeez. Don't get me started. On that note, we're talking about the offensive line. I just saw something today, actually. TJ Watt just renegotiated his contract to open up another $6.5 million. In my mind, my eyes flashed immediately, and I'm really hoping that is to pick up one of these free agent linemen that are still available. What do you think about the offensive line? Because I'm a little terrified. I think we can make do because we did last year.
Right.
I don't know. What are your thoughts?
The scariest thing is depth, right? Like you're at that position, you're going to have injuries that and like losing that. It's a unit, right? An offensive line is a unit, right? And so you've got 5 guys out there, and you probably have 7 total that are probably seeing reps during an NFL game. Because you're not going to swap that most of the time. You know what I mean? You're not going to swap that center out during the game. Your left tackle is going to be your left tackle, right? But you might have power packages that come in, and left guard, right guard, things like that, depending on which one of those crazy cards they got up in the air, right? So you might have 7 guys, and then most of the time your 7th guy is somebody that can float between all 3 of those interior positions, right? Most of the time guard doesn't go to tackle, but left guard is the same thing, and they can play some center, right? They can take some snaps. And so the scariest thing to me is depth, right? So if you can maintain that offensive line through the preseason, if you can maintain your starting 5 offensive line, first couple of weeks of the season, if you maintain that group, whether they're Pro Bowlers, whether they're rookies, whether they're journeymen that have come in, I think that sets the tone for the rest of the season, because if they can accomplish their job as a unit for those first couple of weeks, 5-6 weeks into the season before somebody gets hurt, you've given the rest of the offense a chance to click. You've given the quarterback a chance to develop in who he's going to be that season, or how the new playbook is going to work, things like that, because he's not getting creamed, right? Or the running backs aren't bouncing everything outside because there's no holes in the middle. And so whatever they do, again, $6.5 million, right? If all of that goes into, bringing in a journeyman lineman that's, an experienced guy that's got some snaps for the last 5 or 10 years, great. I don't think you can invest your money in any better place at this point in time in terms of free agency deals and where you're headed in the season is get some depth on the line.
How long does it take a lineman to get up to speed?
Oh gosh, I'd be speaking out of turn if I said I knew anything about what NFL linemen are like going from team to team, right? But it's terminology is probably the biggest thing that it comes down to, because an A gap is an A gap and a B gap, but a 1, a 2, a 3, a 5, all those kinds of things. But I cannot stress to you enough how much more complex playing on the line is than people assume, compared to, it's two big dudes across from each other, right? Which is the crux of it, right? But when,
especially nowadays.
Yeah, exactly. And so like when you're playing, guard tackle, guard center, those kinds of things, they're spending the entire week looking at film saying, do you see this tell in this guy? We played against this guy last year. He did this. He was on this team. He did that. Watch this. Look at this. This play is similar to our play, those kinds of things. And so, a dive is a dive and a sweep is a sweep. But learning those terminologies, and then it's a dance, man, with that guy next to you on either side of you, whatever it is. You have to know what they're going to do and how they're going to react to a blitz, who they're going to pick up, which way they're going to turn, how fast are they, right? And those kinds of things. So, and you can only see that at game speed. You can only see that at game speed. And that's true whether you're, again, all the way down in the middle school level to the NFL. You cannot replicate game speed in practice, because if those guys were capable of game speed, they'd be playing for a different team on the ones, right? And so you've got to see it at game speed. So weeks, to make that happen.
Yeah, and that's the reason I ask is because the Raiders are in a similar situation with their offensive line. It's a bunch of journeymen, a couple of young guys. The only established player we really have on the offensive line is Colton Miller at left tackle. The rest is pretty unsettled. So there's plenty of guys out there on the market right now that I've had my eye on that I know are at least competent offensive linemen. But realistically, I was curious, how long is it going to take if we sign them now? Is it going to be week 4 before the
right?
Yeah,
Patience from the play caller, I think, is important too, right? From the offensive coordinator, you're not going to open up, a 300-page playbook with a guy that's been in camp for 2 weeks. That's just it's not going to happen. And so, keeping expectations, managed for how much of that playbook you're going to be able to use and when you're going to be able to use it. I think the offensive coordinator and the offensive line coach and how they work together. And again, like most of the NFL is zone block stuff anyway, but the ability to kind of ease themselves into situations and walk before you run is an enormous part of that at any level.
Yeah. Well, I mean, all we have coming up is Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack, so no big deal.
No big deal. Khalil will love to be in that backfield. The last thing I got for you, Steelers-wise, just who's somebody that you're excited about, maybe new face or somebody that stepped up. I have mine. I'll give it to you after you're done, but I'm just curious who you got your eye on.
Oh, man, who's – Kyle, I can't pronounce his last name, the new tight end.
Freiermuth?
Starts
out of the draft last year?
Yeah, is that what it is?
Pat Freiermuth? That's my boy.
And so
in the second round.
We have this long history in Steelers country of having a tight end that is a crowd favorite, right? And we've kind of been missing that for like the last 2 or 3 years in terms of somebody that's just been an impact player, And so I think I'm excited about that dynamic because you've got Trubisky, right? But anytime you've got a new guy in the offense that's, a new quarterback in the offense, you're doing a lot of checkdowns, right? And you're playing over the top.
For sure.
You're playing that short game. And so I think that resurgence of like the short passing game and the flats with the running backs and the tight ends is where the new Steelers offense is going to have to come from for a little while, because you don't have Big Ben back there shrugging off D tackles like they're feathers standing around to throw a deep ball to some guy that runs a 4.1 40, like that's not going to be the case for a little while. And then, in terms of he's not a new addition by any means, man, but watching TJ Watt become TJ Watt, what a ride, man. Like to get to see him live up to the hype and the last name and, that all-time sacks record and things like that in a single, like it's just being a Steelers fan is being a fan of good defense, and he is the epitome of what Steelers defense is. And so, like, he's my guy right now,
I love it. My wife's too, but I don't want to talk about it. The one thing I'll say about him, and I mean, you can get me on my soapbox with these guys, but I don't think there's a single player in the league, maybe barring quarterbacks, that is as impactful as he is at his position.
Oh, sure.
The man is just unreal. I mean, there's nothing you can say about him other than he's just unreal, and he still is underrated. He
Right.
continually gets, lower, I guess, respect than in my opinion, he deserves. Obviously, I'm biased, but back to Freiermuth. I gotta tell you about this guy. So I was high on him coming out of Penn State. I was super pumped about him because
I forgot he was
his big thing was he'd never dropped a single pass in the red zone his entire career there. So I was super pumped about him. But to your tight end comment, obviously that is a Heath reference.
Heath.
That the fandom is just to die for Heath. I went to 2 games last year, and the first game was against the Bengals early on, and I'm not saying I started it because I know I didn't, but I led a lot of Muth chants, and you'd get people involved, and obviously, I mean, you made a note of it. We're fanatics. I absolutely live and breathe this stuff. So as the season went on, seeing people get behind him, and now he's a top 20 tight end in the league, and he's getting all these accolades. But that second game against the Titans, that stadium was one big Muth every time that boy touched the ball. So I love that you're pumped about him because I'm super excited about him as well.
And he fits the mold, right? For
sure.
For the Steelers. Like they keep repeating things. They have classes of players that they go after, and it just works. Do you know what I mean? Like it's especially on the offensive side of the ball. So that's
for sure.
And I'm optimistic.
I always go back to Polamalu's Hall of Fame speech because it was gold. Obviously, he's one of the best ever. But that whole idea of a Steeler player, they really do buy into it.
Yep.
Right, wrong, or indifferent, they're going to stick to their plan. Tomlin drives people crazy, which is why I love him. But
Tomlin press conferences are a thing of beauty. He's just his eyes are super big, and he's just like, say something. You know what I mean? Like he's great about that.
This last one about the QB depth chart is probably one of my favorites. We will let you know at our leisure. That is my favorite line that I think I've heard in years.
Right.
Last thing,
never, but never. That's my favorite.
Fair enough. The last thing I'll say about him, the guy that I'm pretty pumped about, is George Pickens. That I think he was the best pick out of the entire draft, and not because he went to the Steelers. The injury and him dropping, that dude, watching him in the preseason, the fight that is in that, the dog that is in him on offense, it takes me back to Hines Ward days. He is, they're running to the other side, and he's dropping his DB to the ground.
Right. It's
loving it.
And again, that's
it's a mentality.
Yeah, exactly. And that fits like the Steelers fan base. You know what I mean?
For sure.
Win or lose, you get to see something like that happen, and it's exciting, right? I totally agree with you. I every single year there'll be another name on the Pittsburgh Steelers depth chart that I had no idea that we drafted. And every year that player becomes some sort of impact by the end of the year. And that's, again, like I'm lucky to be a Steelers fan. I grew up, 45 minutes from the Pennsylvania border, and so that's why I'm a Pittsburgh fan. That's everybody there was. I still remember Neil O'Donnell, Pittsburgh's going to the Super Bowl song playing on the radio, right?
For sure. It still does. They just changed the names,
right? So, but back to that point, it's just that just like the whole organization takes care of business, and that's why they're perennially, maybe not a favorite, but they're good every year, and that's.
For sure.
Some people aren't that lucky,
Bill and I have talked about it. There's certain organizations, I think of until maybe recent years, but, of Green Bay, of Pittsburgh, they've always handled their business, I always want to say, in a classy way, because the Rooneys are class acts.
Longevity.
I like that about a franchise. Even Baltimore, as much as I hate to say it, they have that same identity, that same
identity is a great way to put it.